There is a claim buried inside the Book of Enoch, a book the early church quietly set aside more than 17 centuries ago, that almost nobody talks about. It is not about the giants. It is not about the flood. It is about a specific kind of person that certain spirits cannot bear to stand near. Enoch describes beings that move through the world unseen, that attach themselves to the willing, and that recoil from a small number of humans, as if they had been burned. The people they cannot approach rarely understand why. They only notice that certain rooms seem to empty around them, that certain people cannot hold their gaze, that the hostile grow strangely restless the longer they are forced to remain close. And the oldest surviving copies of Enoch, the fragments pulled from a desert cave and the manuscripts locked inside an Ethiopian church, describe exactly what marks those humans and exactly how the others behave when they cannot get away. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the teaching Enoch gives about these spirits and the humans they cannot approach, the exact passages where the spirits are named and their behavior described, the protective markings the ancient world carved and wore to keep them away, the original GS wording the Ethiopian church preserved after Rome, let the book fall out of scripture, copied out line for line. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. To understand the claim, you have to understand the book, and why so few people have ever truly read it. The Book of Enoch was not a fringe text in the ancient world. It was read, copied, and quoted openly. The letter of Jude, which sits inside the New Testament to this day, quotes Enoch directly by name, warning of a judgment coming with 10,000s of his holy ones. Early Christian writers treated it as authoritative. Tertullian defended it. It circulated among Jews and Christians alike for centuries, taken seriously by people who were far closer to its origins than we will ever be. The single most quoted line comes at the very opening of the book, the prophecy that the Lord comes with his holy ones to execute judgment upon all. When the letter of Jude reaches for authority to warn its readers, that is the line it borrows, almost word for word, and attributes plainly to Enoch, the seventh from Adam. For a first-century writer, quoting Enoch was not eccentric, it was ordinary. The book was simply part of the furniture of the world they lived in. Then it disappeared from the West. As the councils and traditions that fixed the Christian canon did their slow work, Enoch was left outside the walls. For most of 1,000 years, the Latin and Greek churches lost the full text entirely. It survived in only one place. Far to the south, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had translated the book into Ge'ez, their ancient liturgical language, and kept it inside their scripture, where it has remained without interruption to the present day. The West did not see a complete copy again until a Scottish traveler named James Bruce carried manuscripts out of Ethiopia in the 1770s. More than a century later, an Oxford scholar named Robert Charles produced the translation that most people who have read Enoch in English have read. And then, in 1947, everything changed. In the caves above the Dead Sea, among the scrolls hidden there 2,000 years earlier, searchers found fragments of Enoch written in Aramaic. The book was not a medieval invention. It was genuinely ancient, older than large parts of the Hebrew Bible had once been assumed to be, and the community that hid those scrolls had treated it as holy. Sit with the strangeness of that survival for a moment. A book that the center of the Christian world had decided to forget was, at that very same time, being guarded in two places at opposite ends of the earth, without either one knowing anything about the other. In the mountain churches of Ethiopia, monks were still chanting it as scripture. And in a sealed jar in a cliff above the Dead Sea, a far older copy was waiting in the dark, laid there before the time of Christ by a community that considered it too important to lose. The West spent 1,000 years believing the text was gone. It was never gone. It was only kept somewhere the West was not looking. So this is not a modern forgery. It is one of the oldest religious texts humanity still possesses, and what it says about these spirits is stranger than almost anything that made it into the Bible sitting on most people's shelves. There is a reason a text like this made the guardians of orthodoxy uneasy. Enoch does not deal in vague warnings, it names names. It describes a rebellion in the heavens in concrete detail. It lists the leaders of that rebellion one by one. It records the specific knowledge they smuggled down to mankind, and it lays out the sentence handed down against them. A book that specific is difficult to control. You cannot fold it quietly into allegory. And the part that unsettled readers most was never the giants or the flood. It was the quiet machinery running underneath the story, the explanation of where the unseen things that trouble human beings actually came from, and why they behave the way they do. The story begins with a descent. Enoch describes a group of the Watchers, heavenly beings, 200 of them, who looked down at the daughters of men and desired them. Under a leader the text calls Semjaza, they bound themselves by an oath on the peak of Mount Hermon and came down. They took wives. And they taught humanity things humanity was never meant to have. One of them, called Azazel, taught the making of blades and armor and the working of metals, and taught women the arts of ornament and paint. Others taught sorcery, the cutting of roots, the reading of the stars, and the signs of the sky. Knowledge poured down through a door that was never supposed to open. Enoch is careful to record how it was organized, because the organization is what makes it a crime and not an accident. The Watchers knew exactly what they were doing. Semjaza feared that he alone would be blamed for the whole scheme, so he made the others swear an oath together, binding all 200 of them to the plan, so that the guilt would be shared and no one could turn back. They descended in the days of Jared onto the summit of Hermon, and the very name they gave the mountain preserved the memory of the oath. This was not a moment of weakness. It was a conspiracy, sworn and sealed, and then carried out. But it is what the union produced that matters most here. The children of the Watchers and the women were not ordinary children. They were the Nephilim, giants. And Enoch describes them consuming everything the people could grow, then turning on the people themselves. The earth filled with violence and cried out. As the violence spread, the cry of the earth reached heaven. And 4 of the great archangels looked down and saw the blood and the ruin below. They carried the plea of a dying world before the throne, and judgment was pronounced. Azazel was to be bound hand and foot and cast into the darkness. The others were made to watch their own children destroy one another before they themselves were bound for 70 generations beneath the hills. And the flood was coming to wash the surface clean. But a flood washes bodies. It does not touch what has no body. And that is the loophole the entire rest of the story turns on. And here the text does something no summary ever prepares you for. When Enoch is brought before the throne to plead for the fallen Watchers, God refuses them, and then explains what will happen to the giants when their enormous bodies finally die. This is the passage almost nobody quotes, and it is the origin of everything that follows. The giants, God says, were born from 2 natures, from spirit above and from flesh below. Because of that, when their bodies are destroyed, their spirits will not go where the spirits of the dead go. They will not rest. They will not be gathered. They will remain here, on the earth, homeless and hungry, and they will become what Enoch calls evil spirits upon the earth. The spirits of the giants, the text says, will afflict, oppress, attack, wrestle, and bring destruction upon the children of men, and they will rise up against them because they have proceeded from them. And the sentence attached to those spirits is the strangest part of all. They will not be called to account, God tells Enoch, will not face judgment until the great day at the end of all things. Until then, they are simply loose in the world, unpunished and unrestrained, doing what their nature drives them to do. Think about what that means. Every other rebel in the story is bound. The Watchers are chained. Their bodies drown in the flood. But the spirits that come off the giants are left to roam, because there was no law written for a thing that was never supposed to exist. They fell through a gap in the order of creation, and they have been moving through that gap ever since. Read that again slowly. Enoch is telling you that a whole category of unseen thing was created almost by accident, is native to this world, has no body of its own, and never rests. That is where these spirits come from, not from some other dimension. From here, from the death of something that never should have been born. Before we move on to the next passage, stop for a second. What you just heard about where these spirits come from is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Giez account. The origin of the spirits. The reason they cannot rest. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. So what does a spirit like that actually do? Enoch is precise about it, and the precision is unsettling. These spirits have no flesh, but they came from flesh, and so they crave it. They are described as restless, unable to settle, driven to keep moving because stillness itself is a kind of agony to them. They hunger and are never filled. They seek, and the thing they seek is a body, a place to rest, a host through which to act inside a world they can no longer touch on their own. This is the same figure you find echoed centuries later in the Gospels, when an unclean spirit is described walking through dry and waterless places, seeking rest and finding none, until it turns back toward the house it came from. That image did not appear out of nowhere. It is Enoch's homeless spirit, the restless thing that has to keep moving. The gospel writers and their audiences already knew the teaching. They had grown up on it. The clearest picture the Gospels give is the man who lived among the tombs, the one no chain could hold, screaming among the graves because the thing inside him could not be still. And when he was brought face to face with the one presence it could not endure, the spirit did not grow bold. It panicked. It begged. It asked not to be tormented, not to be sent into the abyss before its appointed time. That is the tell in its purest form. The thing that terrorizes everyone else is itself terrified the instant it is near what it cannot abide. Strength in the open, panic in the presence. And this tells us the first rule of how these things behave. They are drawn to what is open. A person who invites the arts the watchers taught, who reaches for the forbidden knowledge, who opens the door on their own, is not resisted at all. They are welcomed. The spirit does not need to fight its way in. It is simply offered a home. Which raises the exact question this whole video is built around. If these spirits move so easily toward the willing, what happens when they are forced near someone they cannot enter and cannot stand? Here the tradition becomes very specific, and it does not come only from Enoch. It comes from the same desert caves. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls there is a set of hymns scholars call the Songs of the Sage. They were written for a figure called the Maskil, an instructed one, a teacher set apart, and their stated purpose is astonishing. The hymns exist to frighten and to terrify the spirits. They name them directly. They call out the destroying angels and the spirits of the bastards, a term that reaches straight back to the Nephilim, the illegitimate offspring of the Watchers, whose disembodied spirits Enoch had already described. The teacher does not beg these spirits. He proclaims the majesty and the splendor of God, and the spirits flee from the sound of it. This is the key that unlocks the whole claim. The ancient tradition did not believe these spirits were unstoppable. It believed they had a weakness, and the weakness was not a weapon or a ritual object. It was a person. A human being who carried something the spirits could not endure to be near. The one who belonged wholly to God, who was sealed, who was filled with praise and with the divine name, became a place the spirits could not approach. Not because that person was strong, because that person was, to a homeless and restless spirit, simply unbearable. Like a burn, like a light that cannot be looked at. It is worth being clear about what kind of person the tradition actually means, because it is almost never the person you would expect. It is not the loudest believer. It is not the one who talks the most about spiritual warfare. In every one of these texts, the human the spirits flee from is marked by something quieter, a total belonging, an absence of the particular hooks these things use to climb inside. Pride is a hook. Bitterness is a hook. Secret appetite is a hook. The very knowledge the Watchers sold was a hook. The person the spirits cannot approach is simply the one who has, over a long and unglamorous time, stopped offering them anything at all to hold. There is no room in that person shaped like the thing that wants in, and that is why the presence is so hard to fake. You cannot perform your way into it. The spirits, in this tradition, are not fooled by the surface. They read the empty rooms, the unhealed grudges, the quiet arrangements a person has made with their own worst appetites, and they go where the door is really open. A protected person is not protected by their reputation. They are protected by what is actually privately true of them when no one is watching. You see the same pattern all through the surrounding literature. In the Book of Tobit, a demon that has already killed 7 husbands is driven off and bound the very moment it is confronted through the servant of God. The New Testament sharpens the idea into a single sentence: resist, and the thing flees from you. Everywhere the tradition agrees. There is a kind of human presence that these spirits cannot hold their ground against, and when they are forced into it, they do not stay calm. They come apart. There is an old Jewish text, the Testament of Solomon, that takes the idea to its logical end. In it, each demon summoned before the king is forced to confess 2 things: its name and the single thing that thwarts it. Every one of them has a specific counter, a name of an angel or of God, a presence it cannot stand against, and the moment that counter is spoken, the demon is undone. The text is later, but it preserves the same ancient certainty in a very clean form. These beings are not all powerful. Each of them has a thing it flees from, and more often than not, that thing is a name, carried by a person who has the right to speak it. And that is where the behavior the title promised finally appears. Watch what the texts say the spirits do when they cannot get away from such a person. They become agitated. The restlessness that always drives them spikes into something visible. In the old accounts of confrontation, the spirit, and whatever it is writing, cannot remain still, cannot remain silent, and cannot keep looking at the one it fears. There is an aversion, a turning away, an inability to meet the eyes. There is a hostility that flares up without any ordinary cause, because the spirit is in pain and the pain has to go somewhere. And above all, there is the compulsion to leave, to break contact, to be anywhere else but there. Now, a careful word here, because this is exactly where these teachings are most often abused. The ancient texts are describing spirits, not handing you a checklist for accusing the people around you. Enoch and the scrolls are not telling you to look at a coworker who seems tense and decide what lives inside them. That road leads only to fear and cruelty, and nothing in these books rewards it. What the tradition is actually describing is a spiritual reality, and the honest way to sit with it is to turn it inward, not outward. The question the texts leave you with is not who around you the spirits flee from. It is whether they would ever flee from you. Because this idea is far older than Enoch, and that is the part that should make you sit up. Long before the Watchers were ever written down, the people of Mesopotamia already believed almost exactly this. On the plains of Babylon and Assyria, the priests kept a vast series of incantations against what they called the Utukku Lemnutu, the evil demons. These were not gods. Many of them were understood to be the restless spirits of the dead, spirits that had not been properly buried or laid to rest, that wandered and attacked the living, that entered the body and would not leave. The parallel to Enoch is exact. Homeless, dead, restless, hungry, forever seeking a host. And the Babylonians had a defense. And the defense was the same one. A specialist priest, the Ashipu, would stand between the sufferer and the spirit and drive it out, not with force, but by invoking the names and the authority of the great gods, by speaking a power the spirit could not endure. The mother and her newborn, thought to be the favorite prey of the demoness Lamashtu, were guarded by an amulet of the demon Pazuzu, and by incantations that named the powers of heaven. The spirit was not fought, it was made unable to stay. It was driven out of a space that had been made unbearable to it. The Babylonians even built an entire nighttime ritual around the principle, a long ceremony we now call the burning. Through the darkest hours, the afflicted person and the exorcist would work through tablet after tablet of incantations, naming the powers of heaven, until the unseen attacker was not merely repelled but consumed, driven out of a person who had been turned, name by name and word by word, into ground the spirit could no longer occupy. The logic is worth holding on to. They did not make the sufferer stronger than the spirit. They made the sufferer into a place the spirit could not remain. The Babylonians wrote this down more than 1,000 years before Enoch ever took its form. The shape of the belief is identical. Certain presences, certain names, certain protected humans, and the spirits simply cannot abide them. And Egypt tells the very same story from the other side of the ancient world. The Egyptians filled their daily lives with protection against the unseen. They carved curved wands from hippopotamus ivory and laid them across the bodies of sleeping children, covered with the figures of guardian spirits meant to drive off whatever moved in the dark. They wore the eye of Horus, the Wedjat, as a charm against harm and against the evil glance. They set the dwarf god Bes, ugly and grinning and loud, at the doors of bedrooms and birth chambers, precisely because his presence was thought to be intolerable to malign spirits, something they would not cross. The hippopotamus goddess Taweret stood the same guard over mothers in labor. They went further still. Egyptian priests wrote the names of hostile powers onto clay figures and pots and then deliberately smashed them, breaking the enemy's hold in the very act of breaking the object. The great funerary spells, the ones we call the Book of the Dead, are filled with declarations by which the traveling soul announces who it is and whose protection it carries, precisely so that the things waiting in the dark cannot lay a hand on it. The formula underneath all of it is the one we keep meeting. Say the name, claim the protection. And the thing that hunts you discovers that it has nowhere left to stand. Look closely at what all of that means. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Hebrew tradition preserved in Enoch never met to compare notes. They were separated by languages, by borders, and by centuries. And all three arrived at the same strange conviction, that there are spirits that afflict the living, that those spirits are drawn to the open and the unguarded, and that there exists a kind of presence, a marking, a name, a person, that those spirits simply cannot remain near. 3 civilizations, 1 testimony. So what do you do with a claim like that, when it has been sitting in the human record for 4,000 years? You do not have to believe a single word of it for the pattern to be worth your attention. Something in the deep memory of these cultures kept insisting on the same picture, that the world contains a hunger that has no body, that it moves toward whoever opens the door, and that it flees from a particular kind of human, Not the powerful one, not the clever one, but the one who is wholly given over to something higher than itself, and who therefore has no empty room left inside for the hunger to move into. And notice what that quietly rules out. It is not fear that keeps these spirits away. Fear is an opening too, perhaps the widest one of all. A frightened person, a person consumed with dread of the very thing we are describing, is not protected by that dread. They are advertising a door. The tradition is stubbornly consistent on this point. What repels the spirit is not terror of it. It is the calm of someone who is already full, already claimed, already home, and who therefore has no reason left to be afraid of it at all. Enoch's answer to why the spirits cannot approach that person is quietly devastating. They cannot approach because there is nothing in that person for them to hold. No opening, no agreement, no shared nature. The homeless spirit comes looking for a home and finds a wall of fire instead. And so it does the only thing left to it. It becomes agitated, it turns its face away, and it leaves almost at once. The people that these things cannot stand near have almost never known it about themselves. That is the quiet heart of the whole teaching. They do not glow. They do not announce it. They simply notice, sometimes across an entire lifetime, that a certain kind of person cannot seem to stay in the room with them, that hostility gathers around them for reasons they can never quite name, that they are strangely hard to be near for anyone carrying something they cannot see. Enoch wrote the description down and sealed it into the oldest layer of scripture we still have, and then the West lost the book for 1,000 years, and the desert and an Ethiopian church kept it safe until we were finally ready to read it again. The spirits are described exactly. The humans they flee from are described exactly. And the only question the text finally leaves in your hands is the one it was pointing at all along. When one of these things is forced to stand near you, does it settle in and make itself at home, or does it come apart trying to get away?